Thank you for plugging into this Family Life News podcast, streaming issues-driven, family-focused news.
Welcome back to another edition of Real Answers with Christopher Anderson. Wednesdays, during the Noon Report, we tackle the tough topics facing today's families with licensed mental health counselor Christopher Anderson. And Chris, in keeping with our month-long focus on forgiveness, this week's segment of Real Answers will be focusing on forgiving oneself. And Chris, you mentioned this is a weighty topic.
No doubt, Brandon, and I'll tell you what, it really is difficult. In some respects, I would even say that it's harder to do than forgiving others who maybe have wronged us.
So what makes this such a difficult thing to do?
I think it's tough for many reasons, and oftentimes the wrongs that we've committed tap into areas of shame that we have in ourselves. I want you to remember the distinction between shame and guilt. Shame and guilt are not the same things. Guilt is an internal check and balance that prompts us to really make things right when we've done something that was wrong. So guilt oftentimes is an appropriate response to feel for things that we've done. Shame, on the other hand, is a view of yourself that we internalize or that we believe about ourselves. And that is a judgment that we place on our value as a person, either that we place on ourselves or that we allow others to place on us. So there's a real difference there. So in other words, we can shame ourselves or others can attempt to shame us for what we do or what we say or what we believe. And I'll tell you what, we see this in society all over the place right now. Shame is not a healthy response. And when we are dealing with it, it can make it hard for us to forgive ourselves and move on or just to get the help that we might need to deal and cope with some issue in our lives that requires us to forgive ourselves. And another reason, honestly, is that we may not believe that others have forgiven us for something that was done, or we may not be willing to forgive ourselves until we think that other people have forgiven us. So in effect, what this is doing is it's giving others a significant amount of power over us. But we need to really look to God, understand how He forgives us. And I think one of the best examples is in John chapter 8, where we see that the woman who was caught in adultery, she was brought in by the Pharisees, and Jesus called out her accusers for their own hypocrisy. And then once they left, Jesus said that He didn't condemn the woman. So right away, He's saying, I'm not condemning you. But then He goes on to address the concern after having taken compassion on the woman, and He told her to leave her life of sin. So instead of allowing judgments of others to supersede how God sees us and treats us, we need to allow God's forgiveness to really permeate our thinking and to get rid of the shame, and then realize, too, that we will be far better off when we do address our sinful patterns and leave those behind and then start living for Christ, and then we'll experience the freedom that comes with that.
What can people do if they are struggling with an issue that they're finding it very difficult to forgive themselves?
First I would encourage someone to find a close friend to speak with about the concern. If you don't have a trusted friend or you believe the concern is just too painful to address with someone on a casual basis, I would really recommend folks then seek help from a Christian counselor. Counselors are required by law to uphold the HIPAA laws, which stands for the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. And in most cases, this can provide a level of safety that maybe casual conversations with friends may not, at least early on. It's amazing, too, that having these conversations with a trusted, godly friend can really provide a sense of connection and relief when we don't receive the judgment or the reaction that we were afraid that we would receive in the first place. And especially when that godly friend patterns his or her response after Jesus' response to the woman caught in adultery, that really truly is a great point of connection between two people. So more often than not, and again, I see this over and over and over again in my private practice, that people's fears that they bring in are often not commensurate with the actual acts. In other words, the fear of judgment or the fear of what it means is far greater than the problem itself. But honestly, healthy conversations, again, with a Christian counselor, a trusted friend, can help put things in perspective and offer input on developing a plan to assist in the process of forgiving yourself and moving forward.
What about situations where the offense for which you need to forgive yourself involves illegal activity?
This is tough because you may need, in order to kind of clear up your conscience and to help prevent things from happening again, go to the proper authorities and make things right. But what will happen if you don't do this? The guilt will continue to gnaw away at your conscience, and it's not likely that you'll be able to experience an inner peace until you do so. So even if you have accepted Christ and know that He's forgiven you on an eternal perspective, and that includes the present, your time here will be plagued by this guilt until you do the right thing or you seek some help to really understand what your actions have caused, but also what you can do to set up a plan to prevent additional actions. So depending on the severity of the offense, again, you may need to seek counseling to understand what the process involves, or even speak with an attorney, perhaps. I mean, it's really hard to say, depending on the situation, of course, but the alternative is to continue to hold the offense inside, continue to suffer the pain and guilt and shame, too, and the fear that goes along with all that. So definitely, if whatever it is that you need to forgive yourself involves illegal activity, seek some professional counsel.
You've been listening to another edition of Real Answers with Christopher Anderson. Wednesdays during the Noon Report, we tackle the tough topics facing today's families with Christian counselor Christopher Anderson.